So today we have the pleasure of being joined by Chad Trim, Senior Solutions Architect here at Bonterra. Chad has been with Bonterra for over 6 years now in various nonprofit facing roles. In his current position, he is passionate about collaborating with his teammates and potential users to help them better manage program delivery, measure their outcomes, and increase reporting potential. Chad is located in Austin, Texas, where he lives with his wife and their puppy. Although Chad, is it still a puppy now? Is your dog still a puppy now?
I don't know if he would be considered still a puppy.
Right.
A little over 1.5 now. He still acts like a puppy though.
Right, don't they all?
Yeah, so today, thanks for that introduction, Ashley. I really appreciate it. And really happy to be with you all today. Few weeks probably, or a few days rather now before everyone's holiday break. So really appreciate everyone taking some time out of what I know is likely a very busy schedule, as evidenced by my very busy schedule these last couple days before the holiday. So really appreciate everyone joining today. We promise that we'll make this time worthwhile. Today's agenda, we're going to go through a little bit of a framing conversation for today's Deminar, but spend the bulk of the time actually going through a demonstration. So we're demonstrating one of our solutions today, but many of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about in terms of making stronger data and reporting are really going to apply regardless of whether or not you're using or are interested in using one of our solutions. So obviously, part of the conversation today is to get you excited about the potential of doing a more custom demo of our solution, but hopefully you can take away something even into your current solutions as well. We'll wrap up the conversation with more of a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A functionality down at the bottom of your Zoom screen as we go along as well. Ashley will be monitoring that throughout my demonstration. She'll answer anything that she can get answered, and anything else we'll save for the end. So wanted to start by sort of posing the central question of our conversation today. What makes data strong? So fundamental to demonstrating impact and growing programs at nonprofit organizations is clean data and stronger reporting. If you've been in the nonprofit space for any significant amount of time, that's probably not a new concept to you. And data entry and reporting really go hand in hand. Again, I'm sure that you're already aware of that. You're probably also heard the saying, bad data in, bad data out. From my time here at Bonterra and hundreds of organizations that I've spoken with, this might be the number one thing that resonates with people, especially those who are currently using a homegrown solution, pen and paper, or spreadsheets. With the populations that you all are working with, we understand that oftentimes data collection is extremely difficult. People in transitional periods and crisis periods of their life, information is constantly changing, whether it's their address, gender identity. And sometimes people just flat out don't want to answer those types of questions, from your very basic demographics that you're collecting to determine eligibility for programming, all the way through the various different assessments, case planning, goal planning that you do with your constituents throughout their time receiving services from your organization. Without the right software, it's hard to, but not impossible to accomplish the things that we're going to go through today. There are definitely ways to make your data stronger, and much of it comes down to setting and defining internal processes. When we were talking about what we wanted the theme of this to be, if there could be one takeaway for something that you all should set as a strategic goal for next year, it would be to define or maybe refine your internal processes. So again, today, I'm mostly going to show you what this looks like inside of our impact management tool. But again, many of the same principles can be applied to any system at any organization. So there's really three main principles that we're going to cover today. Collecting the data that you need to collect, but also collecting the data that you want to collect. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means here in a couple minutes. Having a well-defined workflow process, and we'll also go through how we define workflow internally within our systems versus maybe a broader definition of that. And then how you can create reports that are good reflections of your data. So that's sort of a framing for the conversation today. We're going to break those three down into different concepts and then how that works within our impact management tool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're going to start by looking at a form within our impact management tool. So much of data collection comes down to what you have defined as important information. Now, when I say data collection, the first thing that you might be thinking of is what data you're mandated to collect. If you're joining us today from a nonprofit organization or any sort of public sector agency, there's probably some level of funding that dictates the information that you have to collect. You might even be using a funder mandated system to collect that information. We work with tons of organizations that do at least a little bit of their data collection off of a funder mandated system, or at the very least, the way that their forms are structured are based on how a funder is determining they should be structured. Now, what I hear a lot from organizations that are in that specific situation is that it's great that they are collecting that data, but there's usually a lot more data that they want to be collecting, whether it's for other non-funded programs by that specific grant or public sector agency, or just additional information that's more for internal usages. So one thing that I would really encourage you all to do is not just collect the data that you're mandated to collect, but find unique ways to collect that additional data that you all in your time at the organization and your experience has led you to believe as being really important for proving the outcomes and outputs of the work that you all do. This is important, obviously, because any additional information being captured can easily be pulled into then reports to prove those outcomes. So I'm not saying at all, please don't take away that the data that your funders are requiring you to collect isn't important. I'm just saying that also you want to be able to collect data for your own internal purposes as well. Much of data collection comes down to how you're collecting data. And in our system, it's all about form design. This is a very configurable tool. So while we do have many templatized forms, they're easily editable and you can easily create your own custom forms from scratch as well. If you're doing a lot of your data collection on pen and paper or maybe Google Forms currently, there's actually not a huge difference in terms of how these forms are designed in terms of the ease of use. But common things that I would suggest that regardless of whether someone is using our platform or another platform, to make sure that your data is being captured in a succinct way are things like required fields. So you can see over here on the right side of my screen, I've got my record save checklist. These are all of the fields that I've determined as most important, either for my funding purposes or just for my own internal usage. I don't have to make every single field required, but I could if I wanted to as well. Sometimes, though, with the various populations that you might be working with, it actually might be more cumbersome to make every field in a form required. Because if you have social security number, for example, as a required field, and someone refuses to answer that, you're not going to be able to save or complete this form. So I definitely recommend that whatever those most important fields that you collect, though, are deemed as required. I'm showing you this in an intake or participant profile face sheet, however you all refer to it at the organization, but this applies off of all forms that you're collecting data on. So whether it's an assessment where you want the key questions to be answered, a program enrollment form where things like date of initial enrollment and staff assignment are extremely important, all the way down to goal setting, where the category of the goal, or making sure that you're inputting information, or getting a staff or supervisor signature might be the most important things. So determining what those most important data pieces are for you all to collect is important to that concept of good data in, good data out. Other things that help maintain the integrity of the data being collected in a system like this are also having things like drop-down fields or radio buttons, checkboxes, as opposed to open text boxes. This applies all the way from things like demographic information through the various different service options that you all have. So if I have a drop-down for ethnicity or a drop-down for race, it's much less likely that I'm going to not only key in incorrect information, but make errors in spelling and things like that, that then make reporting very difficult. If I just have an open text box for something like race or marital status, I might accidentally spell Asian three different ways. And then from a reporting standpoint, there's going to be three separate categories for all of those different misspellings. So having those drop downs or checkboxes is just another great way of standardizing how data gets collected in your system. So when we talk about standardizing and defining those internal processes, having a succinct way of things being captured is really important to that good data collection. I would say that as a general rule of thumb, your forms should include as few text boxes as humanly possible. If there is any opportunity to change how data is being captured into something like a drop down or radio button, it's extremely helpful for good reporting. And I'd say that all the way over to things like goal tracking. So if you have common goals that you set for participants, have a drop down for those common goals, just so that, again, you're maintaining that data integrity. The last thing I'd mention that's helpful within our forms or any system you're utilizing that allows for form logic, that's another great way of standardizing how data gets collected as well. There's no sense in mandating data to be collected for various different populations that it doesn't make sense for. So form logic, which is essentially creating if-then statements on the back end of the system, is a great way to mandate that for just certain populations. So maybe if I've got some additional questions that I want to ask of anyone that identifies as female or non-binary, for example, I can have that be an if-then statement where additional questions pop up. You can see that here as evidenced by my exit date. If I put in an exit date on my program enrollment form, it's popping up a required field for their primary reason of exit. Of course, that wouldn't make sense as a required field if they have not exited the program yet. So if that field is empty, that's going to remain hidden. So that's sort of a workaround for requiring specific fields for specific populations or at specific periods of time within your data collection processes. Another thing I'd say is helpful is having separate forms for things. So what we're looking at now is a client's document folder. This is essentially the electronic filing cabinet on a client. So he's already been through the enrollment process. Now he's been existing in the system for a long time. You can see he's gone through 12 different programs, has had 6 different individual service plans, 14 case notes, 9 different outside referrals, and has been assigned to 4 different staff members. The nice thing about separating out all these forms is it's really easy not only for reporting purposes to pull that information from those forms, but to also get a glimpse into this client as well. If I just have one giant spreadsheet or one giant Word document for all data collection on this participant, it's going to be extremely hard to find the data that I'm looking for. If I just wanted to look at their past few case notes, it's a lot easier here when they're separated out into separate forms. And that's not only from a form type perspective, but individual records for all of those forms as well. So not only having a separate case note form, but then creating a new version of that form every single time I'm doing a case note or every time I'm doing an assessment. This also helps a lot with historic documentation for a client as well. Rather than overriding the data to create a new case note from the previous one, I've got all historic documentation in one succinct place as well. One thing about our system is that any of these changes can also be made on the fly through our really easy, simple drag and drop functionality. So anyone that moves forward with one of our products will go through an implementation process where they'll be assigned a project manager from our team that will help with some of that initial build. But something that's unique to our tools is that we take a teach a man to fish approach to the admin side of the system, meaning that we give you all the keys and tools to go in and make changes to your forms at any point. We know that things are constantly changing in the nonprofit space, whether it's just how you want to collect information or how you're being mandated to collect information. Say I'm a nonprofit organization that's utilizing our impact management tool, and 6 months after my implementation process, I receive a new grant that, for whatever reason, is requiring us to track the veteran status of a client. rather than with other systems having to go to tech support and ask them to build me a new field, maybe even pay for that field. You have the keys and tools to go in and add something like a radio button at any point, enter in your field choices, and then as soon as you saved and published this out, that would now exist as a question within your intake form. So if you have any system where you have ownership over form creation or form editing, I definitely encourage you in the new year to go through how all of your forms are set up and take away some of these principles. If you have the ability to change a text box to a drop down or a check box or a radio button like this, definitely make those changes to sort of standardize how that data collection is being done. So I know that's a lot of information on data collection and hopefully some helpful tips and tricks on how to standardize that for your internal processes. Um, Feel free again to throw any questions in the chat. And now we're going to transition to talk a little bit more about the workflow process within the system. Now, workflow functionality is a very specific feature within our tool. So the way that we define what a workflow is might be different than how you define it internally. So let me go through a definition of what a workflow process is. Basically, as it's designed in our tool, a workflow is any set of steps that you've deemed necessary for going through some sort of process. Now, when I mention workflow, hopefully you all have at least some level of those internal workflow processes. If not, again, encouragement in the new year to sort of start to define those workflows. And what I mean by that is, what is the set of steps necessary to go through intake of a new participant? What's the order of the forms that need to be filled out? Maybe I fill out a program enrollment form and then direct them towards a specific assessment and then go through some sort of case planning. Maybe you have an exit workflow process where once someone is done with programming, you need to make sure that you update that program enrollment form and include their exit date, and then maybe send them out through some sort of internal communications tool, a link to a satisfaction survey. All of those are things that we would define as internal workflow processes. If you have those defined internally, there's probably some sort of SharePoint or sticky note system of how staff know what those sets of steps are. So for sort of the first step is defining what that process should look like. The second is, how do you explain to staff, train them, remind them what that process should look like? The system that we're looking at, our impact management tool, will complete that for your staff. So one of the huge benefits of this, saving time, clicks, and training, and ensuring that all staff across the organization are following the same policies and procedures, is with our impact management tool, staff simply need to know what workflow to enroll their client in. And you can see here, I've got a ton. It's likely that you'll have less workflow processes than I do here for demonstration purposes. But as long as they know which workflow to enroll that client in, the system is going to do the rest of that work for them. You can see here it's walking me through these sets of steps automatically. I'm now on task 2 of 4, which is that simple program enrollment. And as I'm completing these different documents, it's walking me automatically through those sets of steps. So even if you don't have a system that's going to walk you through that enrollment process, again, I definitely highly recommend defining what those workflow processes are for you all internally, whether it's for entry, exit, incidents, transitioning from one program to another internally, even things like referrals out to other organizations. I'm sure you've got lots of different sets of steps where multiple forms need to be filled out. So even if you don't have a workflow process as it's defined within our tool, I would definitely highly recommend that you first define what those processes are, and then figure out how you are going to remind staff and train staff on what those workflow processes are. So transitioning to sort of the third bit here, and really taking the concepts of the first two things that we've talked about and combining them into one, which is reporting. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about that concept of good data in, good data out, bad data in, bad data out. Data collection is great and very useful, but the limits of that use are going to be defined by your reports. If you don't have any ability to report out on the data that you're collecting, you're really just collecting data for collecting data's sake. So regardless of whether you're using pen and paper and hand counting or utilizing a system like this that has an internal reporting tool, I definitely recommend taking some time at the beginning of next year to sort of define what your outputs versus outcomes look like. Now, if you're not utilizing a system, outputs might be the only thing that you can accomplish currently, and that is totally okay. And how we sort of define the difference between that is outputs are simple counts of things. So an output report example in my site here would be client demographics. What's the total number of clients broken down by gender, served by race? What's the number of clients that we served last year? The difference between outputs and outcomes is then what's the actual difference that we're making? So we delivered this number of services in 2023. But what was the actual difference that that made in our constituents' lives? If we delivered 5 different workforce development workshops across the year, that's really great to be able to report out on, and really awesome that we were able to do that as an organization. But how many jobs did that lead to? How many increases in job readiness assessments did we see on aggregate? So something more like this client story over time report, this is more of an outcomes report. This is proving my impact as an organization, that I did deliver X number of services. And you can see that on aggregate across 23 different participants, this is how their scores changed over the course of the year. This was the average of their initial assessment. This was the average of their final assessment for anyone that completed programming that year. Not to say that the number of programs and services that we delivered isn't really great data to have, but this is what is really going to differentiate your organization from another organization that was also able to show the number of services or programs that they delivered. Again, I understand that a lot of times reports like these are either too cumbersome to create without a system like this, or just impossible without a system like this. But I definitely recommend that even if you don't have a tool like our impact management system, you at least take some time next year to sort of define what your outputs and outcomes even are for an organization. A lot of times, the question that I love to ask the organizations that I work for or with is, how do you define success for your clients as an organization? I love hearing answers because it differs organization to organization, even if they serve the same populations or administer the same types of services and programming. I think that really gets to the heart of an organization's mission, and then also really helps define what those reports should look like. We've seen some report examples here, so sort of defining what those outputs versus outcomes look like. Again, one is not more important than the other, but those outcomes reports are what can really distinguish you as an organization when you're seeking grants or alternative means of funding. We know that the grant and funding space is becoming more and more competitive as more and more people in the country are in need, and more organizations are competing for that same pool of funds. Funding, unfortunately, has not really increased in the past few years. So the increase in nonprofit organizations just means that more organizations are competing for funding. So being able to differentiate yourself with more of those outcomes reports can be really huge for an organization. And I'll sort of end here by just showing you a brief look at the administrative side of the system. So if you are in the space currently where you're really frustrated with how hard it is to create your own reports from scratch, I just want to give you a look at what a different world could look like with our reporting tool. It's all the same exact, really simple drag and drop functionality as the form building tool. Just the field choices correspond to the fields that exist within your current forms. So if I wanted to build something super simple, like a breakdown of services that I provided, first I'd want to pull in some identifying information on my clients, and then information from my services form. So now I have name, date of birth, date of service, and service provided. What this is showing is the preview of the first 10 of 95 service documentations that have been done. Once I publish this out, I'll have access to all of the service documentations. And it's really easy to manipulate the data from here. So if I wanted to group by the service provided, now I've got a count of each different type of service. So I can compare what services have we provided the most. It's by far service A. Service C, really low providing of that. What this data starts to do is then help me make informed decisions as an organization. If we, over the past year, only delivered service C 10 times to clients, maybe it makes sense to close that programming and offload that to another agency in the community that is really good at that programming and offers it a lot more frequently. Not saying that this data necessarily has to mean that sort of thing, but being able to have insights into that type of data starts to give you the option to make those decisions as an organization. So again, really, really thankful for you all joining today. I really hope that even if you aren't thinking that moving towards this tool in 2025 is going to be even remotely possible for your organization, hopefully there were some things that you could take away that you can apply even to your current methods and systems. And just to recap, what those big things are is making sure that the data going into your system is collected in the way that you want it to be collected. Two is having those internally defined workflow processes. So we've got all of the forms in the data collection. What order do those need to be done in? And do staff know what that order needs to be? And then three is utilizing those data and internal processes to create meaningful outcomes reports that can differentiate your organization against other organizations that follow the exact same policies and procedures. So we've got the chat and Q&A functionality open. Please throw in your questions. We would love to get them answered.
Yeah, thank you, Chad, for a wonderful walkthrough of our solution here. I always love seeing it. And lots of great takeaways, like you said, even if you aren't using our tool, especially about having your forms and your reports have as little fill in text boxes as possible. I thought that was really interesting because, of course, human error might happen. And then you're going to have, like you said, three different misspellings
Yep.
within your reporting. So lots of great takeaways here. Well, folks, it looks like we do have a question here in the chat. Sarah asked, does Apricot have the capability to connect with Tableau or Tableau?
Yeah, so that's a great question and sort of a loaded one because our system doesn't have a native integration with any other tools, so Tableau included in that. But we are very integration friendly as a system. We have an integrations partner that has done tons and tons of different integrations for other organizations. So that would definitely be something that would warrant a further conversation of what exactly you're using Tableau for. We could definitely have a conversation about whether or not our system would actually replace what you're using Tableau for currently. If it is like a funder mandated system or something like that, then we can also explore what an integration might look like. So obviously we just did like a small snippet of all of the different capabilities of the system. So it's definitely possible that you're using Tableau for something currently that our system could accomplish instead.
Right. Great point. And great segue to that, Chad. Folks, if you do have a question that you think might be better suited for a one-on-one conversation, or if there was something that Chad demonstrated today that you want to see more in depth and you have more questions about, I'm going to launch another quick poll here just on the screen. Again, feel free to fill that out and we will have one of our colleagues reach out to you after we wrap up today to kind of initiate that conversation and get that scheduled. But while folks are doing that, I'll give another couple seconds here for folks to drop in any additional questions they might have. But again, Chad, thank you so much for your time, especially taking time out of your busy schedule with, like you said, the
Absolutely.
holidays. We all feel it, whether it's personal and you got some gifts to get or just wrapping things up at work. I appreciate you taking the time to connect. And folks, I appreciate you on the line for taking time out of your afternoon to watch this presentation. And again, we hope that you got something to take out of it, whether or not you are using our tool or looking at our tool. Hopefully you can take some tips and tricks back to your organization and get your data refreshed and strong for the new year. So let's go ahead and make sure any other questions I see. Oh yeah, and Sarah did ask if we offer training or support for creating dashboards for the
Yeah.
results.
Yeah, we've got tons of different trainings modules for basically anything within the system.
Wonderful. Perfect. Alrighty then, folks. Well, if I don't see any additional questions, and if we do, we'll definitely connect with you offline. But again, thank you all for your time and attention and engagement. We definitely appreciate it. And I don't think we will see you all before the new year. So happy new year. Enjoy your holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you all back in 2025. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.